Heart disease isn't just a cardiology problem. It's an everyone problem. According to the CDC, someone dies from cardiovascular disease every 33 seconds. About 1 in 20 adults over age 20 already have coronary artery disease. And here's the one that stops me in my tracks. Someone in the United States has a heart attack every 40 seconds. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear statistics like that, it's a wake-up call. And honestly, I'll be the first to admit, when it comes to lipids, I've mostly relied on the basic LDL is bad, HDL is good explanation. But the truth is, heart disease is so common that every single one of us, whether we work in primary care, pediatrics, nutrition, or another specialty, needs to be more confident in understanding and explaining cardiovascular risk. Now, I work in pediatrics. I don't manage adults with heart disease day in and day out, but my dad is a cardiac patient, and learning more about lipid management isn't just about professional knowledge for me. It's personal. So today's episode is going to be a little different from our usual heavy focus on nutrition. So I just wanted to give a heads up to my RD friends who are listening, because today we're leaning a little more into the clinical side of things. But trust me, this is information you'll want to have, whether for your patients, a loved one, or even yourself. So if you're new here, I'm Colleen, a PA, dietitian, and your nutrition mentor. Welcome to the Exam Room Nutrition Podcast, your guide to giving better nutrition advice. So today we're talking all things lipids, the often confusing, often overlooked world of cholesterol, heart disease prevention, and why the standard lipid panel might not tell you the full story. And we are in the best hands for this conversation. You are going to love my guest. His name is Dr. Josh Wageman, a PA and clinical lipid specialist with multiple doctoral degrees, including a PhD focused on cholesterol disturbances in Alzheimer's disease. Josh also holds a doctorate in physical therapy, has practiced in endocrinology, teaches lipid physiology as an adjunct professor at several medical programs, and most importantly for today, he's the author of a brand new book titled The Home Security System and the Lipid Neighborhood, a fantastic book that makes cholesterol and heart disease prevention easy to understand. Josh is witty, funny, and has a gift for using brilliant analogies that make even the most complex concepts stick. And today's conversation is just a peek into the way he explains lipids. Trust me, you're going to be taking notes and buying his book after this episode. And if you're listening to this before May 21st, I would love to invite you to a live Zoom call with Josh, where he is going deeper into the concepts in his book. So if you are interested and you want to join us on May 21st at 3:30 p.m. Eastern, it will be recorded and I'm happy to send that to you. But if you want to join us on that Zoom call and get your questions answered live, send me a DM on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition or shoot me an email, Colleen@examroomnutrition.com for the sign up link. Now today, in this episode, we're getting into why LDL isn't the bad guy that you might think it is, and how Josh explains it to patients using a mailman analogy. You're going to want to steal this one immediately. We'll also talk about a coronary artery calcium score, or a CAC score, and why it could change how you assess heart disease risk forever. And the one test Josh thinks every clinician should order at least once in a lifetime, even if you're not a cardiologist. So whether you're counseling patients on heart health, managing chronic conditions, or just want to better protect your own home security system, this episode is packed with insights you will use right away. So thanks for bringing me on your walk or your commute to work or wherever you've carved out some time to spend with me. I appreciate you being here. Now enjoy my conversation with Josh. Well, Josh, I'm super excited to have this conversation. I love your energy and I cannot wait to get into the topic of lipids so you can teach us how to fall in love with lipid management. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And is this going to be the best day of your life? Well, probably not, but hopefully like top 7 or 8, so this is going to be a good time. None of the stuff I'm saying today has anything to do with my job as a medical science liaison for Amgen. That's a caveat I always have to say. This is just me talking about all the wonderful things, hopefully helping some people out there, which is why I wrote the book too, but it doesn't reflect the opinions or perspectives of Amgen.
I just love how your book is full of analogies and really how you make learning about this fun. And so it sticks in a unique way. And so one of your big analogies is the analogy of a home security system, how you explain cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. So I would love if you could just walk us through the basics of that analogy, maybe for clinicians who want to actually use it to explain it to their patients.
Yeah. And what I say is for anyone who does not want to have heart attack, strokes, and dementia, I want you to have a great home security system. And I want you to live in a safe lipid neighborhood. Your home security system has 4 basic pillars: normal blood sugar, normal blood pressure, keep inflammation low, and don't smoke or do drugs. Those are bad. But then your lipid neighborhood, that's your cholesterol panel, because every ApoB containing particle, and the vast majority of those are LDL particles, those are potential criminals that can infiltrate your arterial abode. And then the Lp(a) particles, if you pick the wrong parents with that hereditary lipoprotein, those are the felons, because per particle, they're about 6.5 times as atherogenic as your run-of-the-mill LDL particle. So we can look at these things, okay? We can measure these parameters of your home security system. But then people don't live on paper, right? We can observe your cholesterol panel, and it can look like you're living in a rough inner city neighborhood on paper, but people don't live on paper. So one of my catchphrases is, got plaque, get a CAC. What's a CAC? Coronary artery calcium score. I call it the colonoscopy of the heart without the nasty pregame show, because you lay down and a low dose CT, same amount of radiation as a mammogram, hardly anything. Okay. It shows, hey, do you have calcified plaque in your coronaries, which is a late finding in the disease process, or do you not? Have you been broken into? Because if you have been broken into, it's worth considering moving to a safer, gated community with fewer lipid criminals because, well, one of those guys has broken in. So we have better tools in addition to what we can see on paper, and context dictates whether or not CAC is appropriate. You're not going to run a CAC in, an 8-year-old kid, or something like that. But my book explains that and how we can have a better approach to shifting the paradigm for cardiovascular disease, which is the number one killer of people across the globe, from reactionary to preventive. And that's the whole goal.
Yeah. And that really should be where medicine is shifting towards. We do want to prevent these cardiovascular diseases. So I love how you explain it. And I think that makes so much sense for patients to put it into something relatable that they can understand, because all these terminology can be quite confusing for them. And I love how medicine has changed and shifted over the last 20 years. So how we think about LDL particles is different today than maybe 10 to 20 years ago. So can you explain kind of the different roles and where you see things like different lipoproteins like LDL, HDL, Lp(a), ApoB, those things that you're talking about? How is that different today than maybe, 20 years ago?
Yeah, we hope it's different than 20 years ago. I still go into a lot of clinics and they're practicing like the years 2004 or maybe even 1994. And that's one of the reasons I wrote this book as well. So there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to cholesterol, and trying to help people find the signal amidst the noise is one of my goals. And, unless you have somebody who's well acquainted with this stuff, is usually LDL bad, HDL good, everybody take a statin. And so to start off with those 3 core misconceptions, we'll address those one by one. And so LDL bad. Well, if it's in your arterial wall, an LDL particle can be a bad guy. But the purpose of these ApoB containing lipoproteins, which would include the VLDL, IDL, LDL, Lp(a) is a little different, even though it has an ApoB on it, and we'll talk about that one later. But really, the purpose of these ApoB containing lipoproteins is to be mailmen. Well, are all mailmen bad dudes? No, most mailmen are fine as long as they deliver the mail and then go home at the end of the day. So what's the mail? Well, the mailman, they deliver triglycerides, a few phospholipids, a few fat-soluble vitamins to target tissues, primarily the adipocyte and the myocyte. Then they go home to the liver at the end of the day. Great. That's what we want the mailmen to do. Okay. And there's mailmen that work the postprandial shift after you eat, which would be chylomicrons. And then there's mailmen that work around the clock, which would be the VLDL, IDL, LDL particles. Great. As long as those mailmen are out there delivering the triglyceride packages, they're fine. However, what if instead of delivering the triglyceride packages, they deliver plaquages to your arterial wall? Because you can't have atherosclerosis without one of these ApoB containing lipoproteins, one of these mailmen going rogue, okay? Because it's not supposed to deliver the mail to your arterial wall. And then the maladaptive immune response ensues, and then you have these foam cells, fatty streaks, infiltration of inflammatory cells, vascular smooth muscle cells that forms this plaque, and then that plaque can rupture, and then boom, we're in trouble and we're in the cath lab. So that's really how this works. So these things aren't inherently bad. Mailmen aren't necessarily bad dudes, but Let's say the mailman is driving through a sugar storm, because we know that diabetes and diabesity and insulin resistance very much associated with increased risk of cardiovascular events. But these mailmen, if they're driving through a sugar storm, they're more apt to run their trucks in the arterial wall where they don't belong. So they can be bad, but it's not inherently a bad thing to have these particles, because they're just delivering primarily fatty acids to oxidative tissues or to adipocytes. And so that's one of the misconceptions. And then HDL good. I'll tell you what, HDL does some phenomenally good things. HDL can be kind of seen as sort of like the police force. And HDL is capable of many charitable community activities. For instance, if there is a cholesterol-laden perpetrator that finds himself in your arterial wall, HDL particles can actually go in and remove that, take it back to the liver, and then, hey, we cleaned up the mess before it became problematic. That's called cholesterol efflux capacity. So HDL particles can do that. That's awesome. Okay. And then HDL particles actually, this is crazy, they can actually help glucose uptake in skeletal muscle via some insulin independent mechanisms and possibly some insulin dependent mechanisms. Holy smokes. Nobody ever said, I wish I was more insulin resistant. So that's really cool. You're utilizing glucose well. And then additionally, HDL can actually function as a sink during times of sepsis. Sepsis is a bad day. I don't recommend, trying to go out and get sepsis. But when there's a lot of lipopolysaccharide around, or if it's a gram-positive bacterium, lipoteichoic acid, HDL particles can actually bind that up and take it back to the liver, and then it can be excreted in the bile so you don't die. Well, that's also good. And that's called reverse lipopolysaccharide transport. So, and HDL particles can do other things too. I mean, HDL is phenomenal, right? But a static measure of HDL cholesterol, just saying, oh, my HDL cholesterol is 70, so I'm invincible. A static measure of HDL cholesterol gives you no idea of its functionality. You don't know. You don't know if that's a good cop or a bad cop or whatever. And a lot of times people with really high HDL cholesterol, they actually have dysfunctional HDL particles, and then they have accelerated disease. I had a gal who had an HDL cholesterol of like 108, and she was like, oh, no, don't worry about my lipids. I mean, I'm a lipid specialist, so of course, I'm always concerned about lipids. But she's like, oh, don't worry about that. My good cholesterol is high, so I'm invincible. My ratio is good. People will say that. And I'm asking her about her family history, and everybody's having heart attacks and strokes and things. I'm like, I'm not really sold that this is good HDL cholesterol. And she had a coronary artery calcium score of over 1,000. And so she had pretty advanced disease. And now, conversely, low HDL cholesterol. We know low HDL cholesterol is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, but why is that? Well, in general, low HDL cholesterol is just another sign of insulin resistance, okay? Because when you have a ton of triglycerides around the clock, you're not actually delivering the packages because, well, your mailboxes are full. Then, over time, these HDL particles get fat and bloated with triglycerides. This would be like a police officer that can't pass his fitness test because he's overweight. So your body's like, yeah, that's a bad HDL particle. And so what it tries to do is do a fat loss procedure. Hepatic and endothelial lipase come in and they try to trim the fat, these triglycerides off the HDL particle, but they overshoot it. So what you're left with is a emaciated HDL particle that's no good for anything and won't be able to pass his fitness test for that reason. And your body's like, darn it. And so it's actually your kidney that comes in and catabolizes the ApoA1 particles, the primary structural lipoprotein on HDL. And over time, that leads to a decrease in HDL cholesterol levels. Oh, so it's really just telling you something more about the metabolic milieu rather than saying the HDL particle is doing this, that, or anything else. And so if you want to use HDL cholesterol for anything, it's kind of like the hemoglobin A1C of how high your triglycerides get after you eat. Interesting, but there's always exceptions. So basically using HDL cholesterol to say, oh, I know what, your police force is doing or what's not doing, you don't know. And so that's another misconception. And then everybody take a statin is another misconception. Well, statins do some good things in the right context, right? For people, and they have a lot of data in the right person at the right time in, mitigating risk of cardiovascular events. That's great, but at the same time, they're not a panacea. And this is just talking about the lipid lowering therapy front. The year is not 2004. There are other lipid lowering therapies that have proven to reduce cardiovascular events in large clinical trials. And so having an understanding of the other tools in our toolbox is also an important thing that we go into.
Now, can we talk numbers a little bit? Because there's some debate lately, especially on social media with people who have zero credentials, and they are saying that, high LDL isn't as concerning as it once would be. And so could you just kind of break down, what would be some targets that you personally think are worth aiming for?
Yeah. So the context really dictates the target, right? Let's say somebody has had an event and is at this crazy high risk because you've been broken into. And the greatest likelihood of you getting broken into again is having been broken into in the first place. And there was a 2022 document, the ACC-AHA ECDP update recommended LDL cholesterol levels of less than 55 for these people that have been broken into. Okay, that's not unreasonable. And if you want to use ApoB, which is a measure of particles, I would just say, hey, use 55 for that too, just to make it simple for yourself, because particles dictate risk. And that's an important thing to note too, because it's not just the mass of cholesterol that's carried, it's actually the particles that are carrying them, because each particle is potentially a criminal. And so that's really important to understand there. And people that, even treated on statins who have a quote normal LDL cholesterol, if their ApoB is still high, they have a 49% increased risk of coronary events. And if their non-HDL cholesterol is also high, along with that ApoB, 82% increased risk of events. And so why is that? It's because they've got remnant particles. It's because they've got insulin resistance with the non-HDL cholesterol particles. And it's because they have too many criminals still in their neighborhood, even though the overall mass of cholesterol isn't real high. And so really for the very high risk people, it's really prudent to get you living in a nice, safe, gated community with fewer criminals. And oftentimes it requires statin plus something else in order to get them there. There's nuance to this, right? And so individualizing your treatment regimen is important. But at the same time, people that have been broken into, hey, maybe you should be living in a safer lipid neighborhood. If you haven't been broken into, well, carry on. And guess what? The 4 axioms of the home security system never change across your lifespan, no matter how old you are. So don't be insulin resistant. Control your insulin, control your life. This is one of my mantras. All right. We want you to have normal blood sugars, but we also want you to have normal insulin levels, because if you have hyperinsulinemia, that's problematic. And then blood pressure. Even though we have patients that come in and, their blood pressure is 220 over 120, and they're assuring you this is normal for me, and I just saw a squirrel on the way over here and I got all excited or what. No, if strokes are normal for you, then 220 over 120 might be your normal, but no, that's not okay. All right. And so we know that. And then inflammation, systemic inflammation is an interesting topic, and inflammation is another context thing. But we know that even if we're just using HSCRP, an HSCRP level, if you're between 1 and 2, that's not great. If you're over 2, that's an independent risk factor for coronary events, independent of what your lipid neighborhood is looking like. And so we don't like that. And most elevations in HSCRP are because of angry adipose, honestly. And then obviously smoking, other things that are perturbing your endothelial function as far as illicit drugs. Don't do those. Those are bad. And so my approach in general, and there's always exceptions based on family history, based on, what your lipid neighborhood's looking like, all these things, is age 40. Hey, go get your first CAC. Hopefully you fire up a 0, check back in 5 years, right? And something along those lines. And I think that's pretty good. Maybe we need to get CAC sooner, because there was a recent article that showed that the mean age for males of having incident of CAC was 36. Oh, well, maybe we should start early. But it all depends. And probably that's just because of the metabolic milieu of our Western societies and how unhealthy people have gotten, unfortunately. But really, there's things to consider there. And there's ways to, I think, get ahead of the game rather than just waiting around for people to get worse.
Okay, what do you wish all primary care clinicians would order as a screening test for their patients, maybe that go beyond what we learned in school, right? LDL, HDL, triglycerides, like that's standard. Do you wish we did more?
Yeah. So, ApoB has become popular in vogue because, like I said, even if your LDL cholesterol is normal, if your ApoB is high, whether you're on a statin, whether you're not on anything, there's increased risk associated with that. And so if you understand ApoB, then that's a great one to use. However, people hear things, they hear me or somebody else talking on podcasts about advanced lipid panels, and then they get this value and they're like, oh crap, what do I do with it? And so if something isn't actionable for you and you're not able to make heads or tails of what you've ordered, it's not worth ordering. And so do I think it will shift towards ApoB as being, part of our guidelines in this country? Yes. But at this point, I would say the thing that you really need to add to your lipid panel is a one-time lipoprotein little a, the LP little a, the felon of the lipid neighborhood, because you either have it or you don't. And LP little a is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, meaning you can have a totally normal lipid neighborhood when it comes to your LDL particles, but if you have high lipoprotein little a, you can still get broken into. And I have a really good example of this. So my buddy, he was not insulin resistant by my standards even, which it's hard to pass inspection when you get labs from me. Okay, so he wasn't insulin resistant at all. No elevated blood pressure. His HSCRP was 0.4, so no systemic inflammation. Has not smoked. Super fit guy, lifts weights, cardiovascularly super fit. But we were on a run because we run together. And he's telling me about his family history. And I'm like, dang, man, this is a bad family history. Everybody's croaking off, having events, all this. And I was like, you should really get a CAC and get your lipoprotein(a) checked. And his 10-year risk calculator, which is what clinicians like to rely on, which I think are absolute garbage, was like 2%. And so, his doctor told him, hey, that a boy, keep doing what you're doing, and we'll see you next year. He got a coronary artery calcium score, and he got his lipoprotein(a) checked. His lipoprotein(a) was 128 milligrams per deciliter. So that's really elevated. Anything, 30 to 50 is kind of that intermediate range. Over 50 is quite high. 128 is real high if you're using milligrams per deciliter. He gets his calcium score, 2,814. So for context, 300, the absolute score of 300, you have equivalent risk of having an MI as people who have prior MIs, even over 4 years. So 300 is like the holy smokes, you're really in trouble. 2,814. And yeah, he had to have a 5-vessel cabbage a year ago. And guess what? He's crushing it at life. He's training for a half Ironman, and I'm helping pace him in his workouts there. He's going to crush it. And I'm excited about that. But really, if he hadn't gotten those, he might not be here, So I think that the coronary artery calcium score gives you so much information. The lipoprotein(a), yeah, it's good to know if you have some felons in your neighborhood. And, there are therapies that are being developed for people who pick the wrong parents with lipoprotein(a). There isn't anything currently approved medication-wise for people who have lipoprotein(a) and disease. The only FDA-approved treatment is lipoprotein apheresis, which is like dialysis of your lipoproteins that you can get if, you're having recurrent events and all these things. The European Society recommends everybody check it at least once in a lifetime. NLA, also here, the National Lipid Association recommends checking it at least once in a lifetime. And the reason they say at least once is because there are several situations in which lipoprotein(a) levels can rise quite a bit. So lipoprotein(a) is usually pretty stable because genetically determined. But if someone starts a statin, statins actually increase lipoprotein(a). On average, about 19%, some more, some less. And additionally, the menopausal transition is not fair. Anybody who says it is wrong. Lipoprotein(a) levels can go up quite a bit during that transition because estrogen actually suppresses the basal production rate of lipoprotein(a). And so when that effect is lost, that can go up quite a bit. So there are certain situations. There are other oddball situations that you can look at if you're a lipid nerd. But getting a lipoprotein(a), knowing about it, I think is real important. And then as far as diagnostic imaging, that CAC, got plaque? Don't know. Get a CAC. It's such a valuable test. And so that's what I would encourage a primary care person to get a handle on is getting a CAC and then lipoprotein(a).
I like your rule that if you don't really know what to do about it, probably don't order it because that is very true. And that's a wise piece of advice. Now, for lipoprotein(a), is there an age that you would suggest getting this done? I know you said a CAC at like around 40. I'm just curious if there's an age that we should be screening patients with.
So the LPA gene on chromosome 6 is fully expressed by age 2, and you'll have near adult levels by, even age 5. The universal lipid screen, ages 9 to 11, that is, recommended by various societies for pediatrics. I think you can tack it on there, especially if there's a family history. So that's not unreasonable. And so I'm inclined to do that, but, just get it checked at some point is the recommendation. And I think that's really the most important thing.
Okay, you mentioned in the beginning kind of the misconception about, LDL being bad, HDL being good, but I'm curious if there are any other misconceptions that providers have about cholesterol and heart disease that you talk about in your book and that you want to clear up.
Yeah, I think really the purpose of lipoproteins is a big one. People just don't really exactly know what cholesterol does. People are kind of peripherally aware that cholesterol is pretty important, and people have also heard that cholesterol is bad if it's in the wrong place. But addressing really the purpose of these things, the purpose of lipoproteins is not to give us heart disease, right? Water and fat don't mix, and your blood is aqueous plasma. And so we have to have a transportation system in order to deliver fats throughout our bloodstream. Well, it's called a lipoprotein because they are water-soluble lipid transportation vehicles. And so these are mailmen. And so that's what we want. And so anyway, really addressing those misconceptions and then acknowledging a lack of cholesterol is incompatible with life. Okay. I mean, cholesterol is a critical part of our cell membranes. 20 to 25% of our total body cholesterol is in the brain. Pretty important up there. And that's my PhD work is in cholesterol disturbances and Alzheimer's disease. That's awesome stuff. And you think lipids below the brain are complicated? Oh, start getting into the central nervous system because the names are the same and the functions are way different. So that's a trip. And so, cholesterol is important for bile acids, right? For essential for digestion. So all these things are really tightly regulated. And so really understanding that there's a big difference between cellular cholesterol and plasma cholesterol is another misconception that people have. Because if you or I had any deficiency in cellular cholesterol, we wouldn't be having this conversation. It's so tightly regulated because it's so essential for life. What we see on a blood panel, it's only about 10% of your total body cholesterol. And so that's going back to the biochemistry, the why behind these things and reiterating it over and over because lipids are complicated, and that's why I think most people just don't invest the time to learn them is because they read an article like I did once upon a time called Basics of Lipoproteins, and then they feel dumb because they didn't understand it. I was right there. And then they're like, oof, let's avoid that. For me, it made me mad and it made me want to learn everything there was about it. But I'm a weird guy. So, there aren't many people like that. But that's what I want to do is I've been so blessed to learn a whole bunch of stuff. And I learn things every day about lipids. That's why it's so beautiful.
I want to spend our last couple of minutes here talking about nutrition because, as you know, my podcast really is all about nutrition and how do we convey this information in a helpful way in a short amount of time. But I also have a lot of listeners who are dietitians. So they're probably really eager to hear what you say and how you educate patients on how we can help them lower their lipid levels through diet. So you talk about your home security framework and repairing broken fences. And so I'm curious as to how diet plays in all of that.
Oh, we could be here for probably the next 4 hours on dietary things. What I'll say is there are multiple dietary interventions that can be effective for people as far as optimizing cardiometabolic health. Okay. And one of my mantras is control your insulin, control your life. If whatever diet you're doing is helping you control your insulin, control your life, and not only are your blood sugars normal, but your fasting insulin or C-peptide, if you check that, is also normal, and you're not secreting way too much insulin to keep your blood sugars normal, well, whatever you're doing is probably decent, And so my deal too is intuitively when you go through Krispy Kreme, you're not thinking, I'm really consciously making a really good health choice today. And when you're at the fair and you're like, oh, I'm going to get a corn dog, you're not thinking, yes, this is consistent with my 2025 New Year's resolution to clean up my diet. No, it's total crap. You don't need that stuff. And so my deal, and this might be seen as a cop out, but it's mainly because we don't have enough time, is prioritize protein, eat real food. Okay. You usually end up controlling your insulin and controlling your life if you're doing that, right? And so that is the simple answer to that. Now, as far as a cholesterol standpoint, the ingested dietary cholesterol that any of us eat does not usually have much of an effect on your cholesterol panel, unless you're a hyperabsorber. There's a lot of heterogeneity to all these things, but the cholesterol itself, let's say you eat an egg, and the yolk has a lot of cholesterol in it. Well, first off, you have to de-esterify the esterified cholesterol in the egg, and there's an enzyme called carboxyl ester lipase that does that. And then if your body spends the work to do that, then there's a ticket taker to the sterile party in your gut called Niemann Fixie 1 like 1. And then, if there's too many sterols in the sterile party in your gut, though, there's a bouncer called ABCG5G8. And if the sterile party gets, a little too ravish, then it kicks them out into your gut lumen and you poop it out. Really tightly regulated. So in general, most people don't have much of a change in their cholesterol metrics if, they're eating dietary cholesterol itself. Now, the saturated fat component is a little different. Saturated fat can lead to a decrease in LDL receptor expression. And there's some nuances with things called ACAT2 in the liver and the preferred way that the liver esterifies cholesterol, really complicated stuff. But that can lead to an uptick in LDL cholesterol levels for different reasons there. And so interesting discussions. I'd love to come back and talk about my theoretical framework for why certain people do get really big jumps in their lipid panel when they go on let's say a ketogenic diet or carnivore diet or something along those lines. But that is a really in-depth conversation that we'll probably have to wait for another day. But at the end of the day, whatever you're doing, hey, got plaque? Don't know, get a CAC, right? Know your baseline metrics. And then if whatever you do, as far as lifestyle, if it's medication, whatever, recheck it. A lot of people will do something and they never recheck it. And that's problematic. I think keeping tabs on whatever's going on with both your home security system and your lipid neighborhood is a good thing if you want to truly be preventive about this stuff.
Okay, what about the clinician who may be more old school and they just tell the patient to follow a low-fat diet? I'm curious your thoughts on that suggestion.
So fat in general is not the enemy. It's refined processed carbs. And then, fat can, pour the gas on the flame. And so, really, I'm not a big fan of draconian fat restriction unless you have a protein lipase deficiency. But that's really, really, really rare. And so oftentimes it's actually, prioritize protein, eat real food, and some degree of carbohydrate restriction that works for the insulin resistant person that has elevated particle metrics on paper as well. And so the context always dictates these things, but in general, the low fat recommendation, it's pretty hard to abide by. And whatever you're doing, it needs to be sustainable, right? The best diet is the one that you're able to consistently do across the lifespan to optimize metabolic health. And so I'm not a huge fan of draconian fat restriction.
As you can tell, nutrition is so complicated, but as you guys know, I love the topic of nutrition. So if you want me to have Josh back on to really dig into what the science says, especially about like carnivore diet, ketogenic diet, and all these other details, shoot me a message on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition, and I will happily have him back on, and we'll have a full dedicated episode all about diet and lipid management. But Josh, we've talked about your book and the contents of it, but I would love for you to share where people can buy it and connect with you.
Yeah, the book is called The Home Security System and the Lipid Neighborhood. And then the subheading is Uncomplicating Cholesterol and Cardiovascular Disease. My goal is for you to laugh a little, learn a lot, and then come away with a relatable framework for not having heart attack, strokes, and dementia. And so that's the goal. And it's on Amazon. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can reach out to me with a direct message on any of these platforms. And I'll get back to you because my whole goal is to help people, whoever you are, whether you're a clinician, whether you're not a clinician, and hopefully use what I've learned along the way to help add some life to your years.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just in awe of how brilliant you are and how much you've studied and learned and just your ability to articulate that in a really easy to understand way. So all of his contact information and a link to purchase his book will be down below in the show notes. But Josh, thank you so much for the gift of your time. Have a great day.
Thank you.
What did I tell you, my friend? Isn't Josh awesome? Now, I don't have a nutrition notes segment for you today because this episode is already really, really heavy and I want our conversation to really sink in. As a quick reminder, he is jumping on a Zoom call May 21st at 3:30 p.m. Eastern. If you have questions you want to ask him directly, jump on the call and join us for a really fun time. It's completely free to attend. Just send me a message on Instagram at Exam Room Nutrition, and I'll happily send you the link to get signed up for that. But if after this episode you're just dying for more cardiology nutrition, I'm going to link down in the show notes episode 38. You will love my conversation with a cardiac registered dietitian. The episode is called Love Your Heart, Nutrition Insights That Save Lives. We actually dig a little bit deeper into the nutrition management of cardiovascular disease. So check out that episode after this one. And if you just loved this episode, I would greatly appreciate a review on Apple or Spotify. That's all I've got for you today. So as always, let's continue to make our patients healthier, one exam room at a time. I'll see you next time.